Just gone past 9 o'clock, so good morning to everybody. I can see a few familiar faces on the webinar, so welcome everybody and good morning. And I hope that going through the information that I'm going to go through over the next hour is going to give you a little bit of insight and some tips and ideas of how you can look at feeling a lot better about yourself coming forward in the future. So I will share my screen and we will get underway. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. I will just minimize this and get to see everybody hopefully here. Here we go. Okay, I can see everyone. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And you know, we talk about imposter syndrome and you know, how we can actually overcome imposter syndrome. And this is something that I think very rarely do people actually talk about. It's not something that many people talk about. So in this time that we're going through now, I think it's important, you know, to make sure that we actually address it and look at it. So I don't think I've shared my screen properly here. Let's have a look. Here we go. Here's my screen here. Share my screen. Okay, great. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. If you can't, or if you have a question, if you can just pop it in the questions and hopefully I'll get to see your question pop up. So, as I was saying, imposter syndrome is something that people don't normally talk about very often. It's something that is one of those subjects that is a bit unspoken. So at a time like this, we really need to look at saying, how can we put our best version of ourselves forward? And you know, what does our best version look like? Well, it definitely doesn't involve having the imposter syndrome. So first of all, you know, what actually is imposter syndrome? What is it? Most people experience some kind of moments of self-doubt. That's something that is common to all of us. That's normal. But what happens is when temporary feelings of negativity become constant and you don't feel worthy of any kind of titles or you don't feel worthy of any kind of achievements that you've earned, it's actually time to change. So it's something that is, you know, it's a thing that we all often feel, but when it's happening more and more and more over, it can then be a bit destructive. Studies suggest that about 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their career. So today we'll be basically looking at what imposter syndrome looks like, how to overcome it, and if so, what you need to do to step up to actually change it. This is what we need to look at. So first of all, so what actually is imposter syndrome? So imposter syndrome, it's a psychological pattern of self-doubt where an individual disregards any of their accomplishments and has a persistent internal fear of being exposed as a fraud. In other words, this phenomena, it basically reflects a belief that you're inadequate or incompetent, despite any evidence otherwise. Imposter syndrome, it's not actually considered an official diagnosis by psychologists, but it's often recognized as a phenomena that could actually lead to a disorder, such as depression. So that's actually what imposter syndrome is, you know, and the funny thing is, and I'll stop sharing for 1 second just to explain this. The funny thing is, as someone who works with a lot of really high achieving people, like CEOs, executives, very highly accomplished people. Now I'm talking about people here who run organizations with, you know, thousands of people who are elite sports people. I think the imposter syndrome is very common amongst these people because it's something that they share with me often. So I tend to think it's almost like not unusual for me to talk to these amazing high achievers that talk about feeling like they're going to be found out as a fraud. So it's interesting that I deal with all these really high achievers, and this is something that is I reckon 80% of them suffer from. So it's not something for the low achievers. So I'll go back to my screen again. I'll share my screen again, and we will keep going. So we understand what imposter syndrome actually is. So now we want to look at saying, okay, you know, where was the original research? You know, where did it come from? So imposter syndrome, it was first diagnosed in 1978. It was diagnosed by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Innes, good name there. Basically, in their research, they theorized that women, they based their study on women that they felt were uniquely affected by imposter syndrome. But since then, studies have shown that all genders, they experience these feelings as well. So it's only been identified since 1978. So it's fairly new. So if you want the study, the original analysis and identification of this syndrome, I'm more than happy to send it to you. So it was first looked at as something that women are affected by, but then it was realised that it was greater than that. So I don't know if you've ever openly felt that you're a fraud, or openly felt that you're, you know, have the imposter syndrome, or have ever felt that you have imposter syndrome. But have you ever brushed off, and, you know, I know this happens to me often, have you ever brushed off a compliment? Or have you ever brushed off an achievement as luck, or being a sign of in the right place or the right time? You know, I know myself, you know, people will often come up to me and, you know, they'll say things like, you know, oh, wow, you know, you look so fit, or you look so healthy, you know, and I'm like, you know, okay, yeah, you know, great. Okay, thanks a lot. But I feel a bit uncomfortable with it. So, you know, I myself identify very much with these feelings. I feel a bit uncomfortable with people giving me compliments. So you might not think that you suffer from imposter syndrome, but if you're constantly brushing off any kind of compliments, well, maybe it's something you do. Does it feel uncomfortable for people to come and say to you, wow, you know, you did such a great job with that project, or wow, you know, you really put that together well, you've got such a talent there. If that feels uncomfortable, maybe you have a touch of it. So if that does sound like you, these thoughts, you know, they might be problematic because they're actually harmful to your self-confidence. So if you're harming your self-confidence, then what that can do is it can actually hold you back from future success, or it can actually hold you back from achieving your goals. So we don't achieve a positive outcome from a negative attitude. So the more positive our attitude can be about ourselves and about our outcomes, you know, the better outcome we can actually have. So what we're wanting to look at saying is, okay, when we're having feelings of inadequacy, what thoughts go through our mind? You know, if we're feeling, you know, this is a hard time we're going through, you know, I don't know if I'm going to get through this. You know, are we then going into a deep dive of negative thoughts or not? Are we saying to ourselves, no, we can get through this. We're going to snap out of it. We're going to be strategic. And if we have to go through, you know, a bit of a downturn in our business because we've had to, you know, slow the operations down, well, we're going to come out of this stronger than before. We're going to get all those systems done that we'd never had time to do. We're going to revamp our website or whatever. So we're going to look at the positive out of a negative instead of, you know, having, you know, moments of self-doubt and then going deeper into that hole. So the reason why we're wanting to look at this is we want to say, if you're having these negative thoughts, how can you turn them around? How can you turn them into positive? So there's actually a few subcategories that come out of this syndrome. Now, one of them, you know, is a common one. So basically it takes on various forms depending on different personalities, depending on different circumstances. they have actually been categorized into subcategories. And until I did some research, I had no idea. So this has been interesting for me researching to put this webinar together. There's subcategories of the imposter syndrome. There you go. I didn't know that either. So subcategories are perfectionism. Sounds familiar. I know lots of people know perfectionists. Superwoman or Superman syndrome. Yep, I know that one too. The natural genius, or the soloist, or the expert. They're the subcategories of imposter syndrome. Now, some of these I deal with every single day with some of my business owners or CEOs or executives. The first one I think is most common. This is perfectionism and imposter syndrome. They often go hand in hand because what happens is these personality types, they set extraordinarily high goals for themselves. So they constantly worry about measuring up to these goals. Now, you know, I have sometimes been told I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And, you know, I know many people that also feel like they're a bit of a perfectionist. You know, I'll often have a list a mile long of things I would want to get done for the day, and I'll get, you know, 80, 90% of them done. And because I don't get the last 2 done, I'll think that, oh, I failed today. And, you know, David, my husband, as quite a lot of you know, will say, you know, why do you have to set such massive lists for yourself? Why do you have to set yourself up like that? And I'm like, oh, I just want to achieve lots. So, you know, have you ever experienced, you know, pushing yourself so that you've got such a big long to-do list, or your achievements are so high that you're actually never going to achieve them? Has anyone ever said that you micromanage things? Do you find it difficult to delegate? You know, I've got a business owner, you know, that when we got him out of the business actually performed a lot better, because what happened, everyone was released to do their own job. So the business owner was actually holding the business back because he was such a perfectionist that he constantly held the business back because he was wanting to have his finger in every single pie and halting the process in the meantime. So is that you? Do you have difficulty delegating? Do you feel frustrated or disappointed when someone doesn't do it as well as you would possibly think you could do it? But the thing is, people have got to learn. Do you ever accuse yourself of being not good enough? Is that something that you ever experience? You know, are you not happy if you get 100%? So if you get 100% of whatever you want done, or 90%, do you constantly feel, oh, that wasn't enough? I could have done more. That wasn't enough. So that's a perfectionist. And I think there's a lot of business owners that are perfectionists, and what they're doing is they're actually self-sabotaging their own success by wanting to have their hand across everything, by constantly pushing to get more and more and more and more and more done. So it's putting themselves under that constant pressure and never being happy with what they've got. So that's a perfectionism, which is quite well known. The next one is the superwoman or superman. Now, I have met many people who have, well, I call it Superman syndrome, but they've added woman onto it. So they basically, they feel like they're going to just be like Superman. They want to come and fly in and fix everything. They feel that they have to fix everything. Or often people who experience imposter syndrome, they have this feeling of not measuring up to their colleagues. You know, what happens is this is a group of people that feel like they have to be the one that's going in and fixing everything and meant to have all the skills for everything, but never, ever, ever get all those skills. It's not possible. So I'll give you traits of this sort of person. So you might be trying to be a superman or superwoman if you stay later than the rest of the people. Oops, Siri's just asking me if she can help me with something. Stay later than everybody else at work. Stay past the point of what's necessary. So you keep working, and you should have finished the task at 5, but you've kept working for another hour, another 2 hours, just to get it a little bit more perfect or a little bit more perfect. But really, you didn't need to. You get stressed if your work is not actually perfect, and you'll actually not have downtime because you're wanting to try and get it more and more perfect. You let hobbies and passions go along the wayside. Instead of having some quiet downtime for spare hobbies, you're wanting to basically be the Superman, Superwoman for everything, so nothing else matters because you're wanting to fix everything. And you almost feel like you haven't earned your title. You feel like you're pressured to work harder and longer than those around you because you've got the weight of everything on your shoulders to fix everything. So, I often will say to people, or you've got Superman syndrome here, you can go away for a holiday for a month. The business is not going to fall over without you. The whole business it's not going to fall over. You've set things up for 10 years or 5 years. It's fine. Don't think that they can't do it without you, because they can. So if some of those things sound like you, maybe you've got Superman or Superwoman syndrome. So that's another subcategory that is something to think about. Have some downtime, because what happens with your nervous system, you're putting it under more pressure. You're actually, the endorphins that are created and the chemical reaction of being under stress and always wanting to be the Superman or Superwoman and fix everything is actually self-sabotaging to your body, because you're just constantly having it in that fight or flight state. So what you're wanting to do is pull back and say, okay, I've done enough. That's good enough. I'm going to have a rest now and recharge my batteries. Imagine if your body was a car and you constantly pushed it past the limits over every, thousands of kilometers past the service and never gave it downtime. You wouldn't expect it to be performing at a high standard. So why are you as a human any different? So you're not a Superman, you're not a Superwoman, you're just a human, just like everybody else. So it's important to sort of, identify if some of these traits are you. Maybe it's time, I try, the word try is very much on my mind. I try to keep an 8 by 8 by 8 balance. I try to have 8 hours, well, I generally always have 8 hours sleep, but 8 hours downtime and 8 hours work, because I know once I get past 8 hours, I start to go downhill. So it's almost self-sabotaging if you do have this syndrome. Well, it is self-sabotaging. That's a fact. The next one, natural genius. Now, this is the next subcategory. This personality type feels that they should automatically be good at everything. So what happens if something doesn't easily come to them, or if they can't get it right, the first try, judgment ensures. What happens is they think that they don't even give it a go. So this might apply to you if you were, say, a child that always excelled without much effort, if you have always got straight A's, or you were told as a child that you were the smart one, that you were naturally gifted or intelligent. So what happens is you dislike the idea of having a mentor because you feel like you can't handle it. Confidence crumbles when you're faced with any kind of setback. You often avoid challenges because you feel uncomfortable with trying something that you're not good at, because ever since you were a child, you always got A's. So you were used to being good at everything. So, and this, I'll stop sharing for a second. This reminds me, it brings me to, I don't know if any of you have read Carol Dweck's book. I think it's called New Psychology of Success. Now, she talks about the growth mindset or the fixed mindset. Now this natural genius, this is exactly that. So someone is, if they've got a fixed mindset, what happens is any kind of challenge, what they do is they just hold back, because what happens if they fail? They're not used to failing. They're used to being good. They're used to being an academic. So anything that comes up to getting a little bit hard, they stop. So Carol Dweck's book, where she talks about, are you of a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, is often how we're brought up. And often it's because maybe things were easy to us, so we just expect them to be easy for the rest of our lives. So whenever there's a path that's a bit hard, we diverge off it. So somebody with a growth mindset is somebody who is attracted to looking at how can I learn, how can I grow? If there's a challenge, great, let's learn how to get through this challenge and let's push through it. So, you know, looking here, you know, is it something that you find uncomfortable with every time there's a challenge? Do you step back, or do you embrace the challenge and say, no, I've got a growth mindset, I don't have a fixed mindset, and push through it? So I hope, you know, if you're interested in finding more about it, Carol Dweck's book is absolutely amazing, and it really goes through the difference between the growth and the fixed mindset. So I'll go back to sharing my slides with you. So the next one here, so that's the third one. The next subcategory here is the soloist. So it's okay to be independent, but when you push away because you want to prove your own self-worth and won't get help from anybody, you also can fall into this category. So this one might be you if you feel a strong need to accomplish things on your own. Now we have a funny little saying here. You know, our daughter, when she was young, she would always go, I do it, and she would hate anyone helping her. It was always, I do it. So, you know, are you the sort of person that has to do it by yourself? You cannot have help from anyone else. You know, if you hear yourself saying, I don't need anyone's help, you know, or you resent people having to help you with a project, or if you have to do it yourself, maybe this is, you know, something that you have, you know, down deep inside. Now, look at the thought. If you are doing a project and you are doing the project by yourself, and then somebody else's IP, intellectual property, comes in and experience, and they want to help you with this project, are you going to have a better outcome with their help, or are you going to have, you know, an outcome that's not as good? So generally, when more people are involved, we generally get, you know, more IP, more knowledge, more expertise, and we can actually do a lot better. So again, you may be self-sabotaging yourself if you are the soloist and just always refusing help from others and always have to do it yourself. So hopefully some of these things you're identifying, and I'm not wanting you to identify them to identify a problem. What I'm wanting you to do is identify them so that you can look and say, okay, awareness is the first step. Let's look and see how I can improve on this and develop my character as a person. So the last one here is the expert. So this is the last subcategory of imposter syndrome. As I said, I had no idea there were subcategories until I did some research. So these people believe that their competence is dependent on how much they know or what they can do, assuming they will never know enough. They fear being exposed as inexperienced or unknowledgeable, sorry. So this could be you if you shy away from jobs that you actually feel that your education is not quite enough, or if you are constantly seeking always extra training, extra skills training, extra certificates, because you feel like you've never got enough knowledge. If you've also been say if you've been in a role for a very long time, and you feel like you don't know enough because you haven't gone enough down different paths. You also be uncomfortable. You feel uncomfortable if someone calls you the expert, because you feel like there's never enough knowledge that you can find. So you feel uncomfortable with being called the expert, because what you've done is you've focused on one field so far, but as we know, there's always more and more learning that we can do. And so because there's always more and more learning, you feel like you've never actually got enough learning done. So being called an expert is uncomfortable. So maybe that's you, maybe that's not you. But it's looking at saying, there's always new learning to be done. It doesn't mean that you're not an expert at your field, it doesn't mean that you have to shy away from, sharing your knowledge and sharing your expertise at all. So it's about embracing what you do know and being honest about what you don't know, in a way where you're, I suppose, accepting it and understanding it. So what actually causes imposter syndrome? Why do people have it? So when we look at the causes of imposter syndrome, factors outside of a person cause. Now, if I refer to someone with a fixed mindset or a growth mindset, referring to Carol Dweck's book, she often talks about the environment, and often, with me, with business owners, I often talk about the environment. So, the environment how we're brought up, that can often shape who we are. So if someone's, parents have always brought them up saying, you can't do that, don't do that, you might hurt yourself, you can't do that. They might be brought up with a fixed mindset. Or, if someone's, say, being brought up in maybe institutionalized or in a school with discrimination, that can play a big role in someone having imposter syndrome. I know, there was a lot of people that were brought up, in schools where they used the cane and things like this, and spoke, down to children. So, if you've been brought up in an environment where you were told to, to be quiet, and you were told you'll never be good enough, well, that's going to have a big impact on what's going on inside in your head as an adult. So one of the things is having a sense of belonging. It also fosters confidence. So if you're in an environment where people, or if you've been brought up in an environment, or if you're in an environment where you don't feel comfortable, or you don't feel liked, or you don't feel safe, well, then that can often contribute to someone having an imposter syndrome. It's especially true when you belong to a group where there's stereotypes of competence, where people are put on pedestals that have more skills in certain areas, or more education in some areas. So I think environment takes a really, really big part in imposter syndrome, and our upbringing is also the other big part, and our schooling as well. That's a huge part. So if you're in an environment at work, or if you're in an environment at home where there's people who are regularly saying that what you're doing is not good enough, or regularly putting you down, that's going to have an impact. That's going to have a really big impact. And it's important to identify, is my environment that I'm in, is it a positive environment, or is it a negative environment? Am I encouraged to grow? Or am I encouraged that, am I regularly hearing that I'm not good enough, or regularly hearing that I can't do it? So, and if it was your childhood, or if it was your school, well, that's the past, and we're going to look at how we're going to change it. So when we're looking at changing it, so if that was the past, that's the past. If it's the present now, well, the environment that you live in, certain friends and certain groups, you can choose to, take yourself away from. There's no single answer of why people experience the imposter syndrome. Some people do pin it on personality traits. Some also look at saying that it's from childhood memories, if there's been bad childhood memories. But what we're looking at saying is there is actually ways to work through them. There's ways to look at saying, okay, here we are today. What can I do going forward now to, identify, yes, I do have some of these traits, and what can I do to actually change them? Regardless of what caused it, there's different ways that we can actually get through it. One of the ways is celebrate achievements. I know it's a simple one, but it's a big one. So one of the ways is to celebrate achievements, and, really make a point of celebrating achievements. Look at saying, okay, what are some awesome things that I've done, or look at celebrating milestones when you've reached milestones, either by yourself or celebrating with your family with a nice meal, or doing something you love, going for, a beautiful beach walk or something like this. So cheering yourself on and sharing with the people who love you at your achievements and your milestones and your celebrations is a great step forward in looking at saying, okay, how can I start to rewire my brain to say, hey, I've achieved something awesome here, and I'm actually going to, acknowledge it, be aware of it, and actually celebrate it with the people around me. So that's the first step, to start to look at small little milestones, small little achievements, and verbally and acknowledge, and with your speech, with your action, and with the people who are around you, and start to actually celebrate and go, wow, we've done something amazing here. It makes you feel so good to celebrate. Even just saying, hey, I got through the whole day today without having one negative thought about myself. I'm going to go and celebrate. It's amazing. It just gives you that feeling of happiness. It gives you those happy endorphins. So the next thing that you can do, I've got a couple of questions up here. I'm just going to have a look what the questions are. I've got a question here from Paul. I'll have a look at them at the end so that I can keep going. So the next one, practice self-love mantras. Now, I know this sounds a bit weird and a bit heebie-jeebie for some people, but they've done a lot of studies on our brain. And if we put good food in our brain, we create more neuron pathways. Good food is good self-talk. So if you're not doing good self-talk yourself, you can start to listen to meditation, or you can start to actually, have some mantras that you say to yourself about, I am worthy enough. I do have something to offer. Tell yourself, give yourself positive, uplifting things. For me personally, gratitude is a big one. Acknowledging every day what I'm grateful for is an amazing way to start the day. Meditation for me, a lot of you here know that, my husband was seriously burnt in a house fire at the beginning of our marriage, and he had third-degree burns to his body and was in all kinds of pain in the mind and in the body, because he sort of turned into Freddy Krueger overnight. And the pain of third-degree burns and operation after operation was just inexplainable, what he went through. I'll stop sharing the screen for a second. So, the pain that he went through was just, I can't even describe the pain that I saw him go through. But one of the things he was recommended to try and get through this pain, because, his mind was not wanting to actually stay around, was meditation. So some 30 years ago, he went to and learned how to meditate, and I, in support of him, decided to learn how to meditate with him so that I could, help him to do it, because he'd never done it before and he thought it was all heebie-jeebie. So we started meditating together some 30 years ago, and, I would definitely say that's had a huge impact on my life, with getting through challenges, getting through self-doubt, getting through self-worth, getting through, these different kinds of imposter syndromes. It gives you, it's almost like recharging your batteries every single day. So if you're having a challenge with change, which, yep, we've had a challenge with change lately. I've had lots of changes thrown at me. I'll choose meditations or mantras around, yes, I can get through this change. I have got tools to get through this change. So having positive self-talk is a huge, huge way to rewire your brain and to set yourself up so that then you can rewire it not to have these imposter syndrome, these negative self-talks about whether or not you're good enough, or whether or not someone's going to find out that you're an imposter. How can you be an imposter of you? You are you. You're unique. You are the only you there is. So you can't be an imposter to you. Everybody else is taken. You're the best version of you possible. You can't be anybody else. So you can't be an imposter because you are you. So definitely meditation, and gratitude is a huge one. So I start off with the meditation. On my way to work, I have a 5-minute drive, every morning on my 5-minute drive, I say out aloud all the things I'm grateful for. And again, that rewiring just gives me the endorphins of wow, how lucky am I? You know, I'm living in WA, especially now. I've got amazing people in my life. I've got amazing opportunity to help people in business. So these are what I'm talking about. These are the uplifting types of mantras. These are the things that you can do. This is the practicing of the self-love that you can do that can help you get rid of that imposter syndrome wiring. Tell yourself something positive or uplifting whenever you feel negative or whenever there's self-doubt that comes in. It's a great method for rewiring the brain. It's a real tongue twister, and it can shift you from the negative to the positive in a really quick way. You talk to Anthony Robbins and he says, how quickly can you change and your mindset or your mood? He reckons you can change it in a heartbeat, in an instant. So also be mindful of the way you treat yourself. And I'm talking about, how do you talk to yourself in the mind? If you were a 5-year-old child, would you talk to yourself the way that you talk to yourself in your head now? Don't know. Some people would not talk to a 5-year-old the way they talk to themselves in their head. So it's okay to be humble. If you're always feeling like you're rejecting praise and rejecting comments, it's okay to be humble, but you're not doing yourself any favors by telling yourself in your head that you're not good enough, or that people will think you're a fraud, or trying to downplay your own success. You know I personally, I found it's taken me a long time for when people give me a compliment to me to say, hey, thanks. I really appreciate that. So just be mindful. Next time when you're talking to yourself about, limiting thoughts in your head, just think, is this thought serving me? And would I talk to a 5-year-old child like this? Would I talk to a 5-year-old child like this? If you wouldn't, maybe it's not going to be a good idea to talk to yourself like that, because if you wouldn't talk to a 7-year-old child like that because you think it would be detrimental to their mental health, well, why would you do it to yourself? So start to be mindful of the talk that's going on inside your head. That talk is not you. You are who you are inside. The talk is just that monkey mind, that chatter that goes on. Don't listen to it. You can change it, and it's something that you can actually do. The next one here, the next tip into overcoming this is saying, learn to take mistakes in your stride. Mistakes are a natural way of learning. When we talk about the growth mindset, the only way we learn is through failing, because otherwise we're not pushing through our boundaries. And I've often mentioned one of the things that she talks about in her book, where they get 2 young groups of children, I think 3 or 4, and they get given a jigsaw puzzle to do the jigsaw puzzle. And those that with the growth mindset, as soon as they've finished and know how to do it, they ask for a harder one, because they've already worked out how to do that jigsaw. Give me a harder one, give me a next harder one, give me a next harder one. But the kids with a fixed mindset, once they've learned how to do it, they don't want another one, because they don't want to fail, because they know how to do it and they're not prepared to go any further. So the only way we learn is through mistakes. The only way we learn is through saying, how do we not do it? How can we push forward? So learn to take mistakes in your stride. Lots of tongue twisters today. When we talk about Thomas Edison, he said, if I hadn't failed, if I hadn't found those 10,000 ways that the light globe wouldn't work, he wouldn't have got the light globe going. Now, of us today, how many of us would have had the tenacity to keep going that many times? We all make mistakes, and that's how we learn. So, if you're making mistakes and then you're saying to yourself, and, I definitely know I do, I will even say it out loud. My daughter and Renee will hear me going, oh, you silly Susie, why did you do that? Just don't say that to yourself. Embrace it and say, well, I've learned how not to do it like that. They can sometimes be a blessing in disguise. And sometimes what we think is really, really bad can actually end up being really, really good in the end. It's actually, you know, ends up being a blessing in disguise. You know, some people might have thought, oh gosh, it's terrible because I didn't get on my flight. But now they might be thinking, wow, I'm glad I didn't get on my flight because I'm really glad I'm not stuck in Europe at the moment. So, you know, sometimes things can be a blessing in disguise, but just accept that there are mistakes. And that's the way we learn, and don't take them as a negative, take them as a learning and push through that learning and embrace them. Think of mistakes as a way to actually, you know, get you along your path further. So the next thing is, you know, sometimes people with perfectionism, they're not prepared to move until everything is perfect. So they very rarely move on with things because they want to get everything lined up. Everything has to be absolutely perfect. There's never a perfect time. So, you know, just send it when it's, you know, they say, you know, good enough is fine. Submit the application or send the email. Yes, review things. But sometimes people just go over and over and over the top. I mean, you know, I was working on a slideshow the other day. You know, I was really, this is an example of perfectionism. I was really, you know, upset by how many business owners are not clear on their financials, because I'm asking them, you know, it's really important to be aware of your financial projections over the next few months in the different scenarios. So I got some slides together, I got some information together. I had a slideshow, it was an old one, but I just needed to rejig it and tidy up. I sat with Eve for half an hour at 4 o'clock. And she left at 4:30. I probably needed another 20 minutes, but no, I needed to get it perfect. I was still in the office at nearly 7 o'clock at night trying to get the slideshow perfect. And afterwards I walked down, I'm thinking, why did I do that? Classic case of, you know, keeping on going. I didn't need to. I could have stayed till 5 and that would have been enough, but no, I had to keep going till it was perfect in my eyes. So rip the Band-Aid off, press send, you know, press save and just move on with it, because it gets to that point where you start to self-sabotage. Nothing is ever 100% perfect. Nothing is ever 100% ready. So just accept it and move on. And no one will notice. You know, no one will notice. If there's a spelling error, no one will notice if it's the wrong font. No one will notice if it's not quite the right color or the right brand. No one will notice. You know, we've got about 3 seconds or something. So the next one here, the next tip that I have is don't count on external validation. Have you ever met anyone who's constantly, always looking for external validation? They're always wanting everyone to tell them that they've done a good job. You know, not even your boss should have the power, or your husband or your wife or your child or your business partner or your colleague. No one should have the power to make you feel good or bad about yourself. So it shouldn't be up to somebody else, someone external, to validate whether you feel that you're good enough or not. It's something that, you know, other people shouldn't be able to control. You own your feelings, and that's how you feel. Don't wait for other people to tell you that you're awesome, or don't wait for other people to tell you that you've done an amazing job. You can't control the way other people will treat you or react to you at work. If you're always striving to get that stamp of approval in order to feel good about what you've done, you might never get what you're looking for. Don't let that drain you or hold you back from continuing your journey forward. Do you place a lot of value on external validation? You know, are you always waiting to get everybody else to praise you for your work? So, you know, it's about saying, you know, I've done a great job. I've done, you know, the best I can with what I have, and I've met my outcome, and I'm happy with what I've done, and moving on, not waiting for everybody else to tell you you're amazing. So do you ever do that? Do you ever wait for that? Or do you ever thrive on that? No, because it's basing on what they think, not what you think. So just be happy within yourself that you've done the best job you can, and you've done it with the skills that you've got, and it's not up to them to make you happy, or it's not up to somebody else to make you feel good or feel bad. So that's my other point. The next one is review your accomplishments. You know, if you're ever feeling down, you know, or feeling not good enough, you know, it's a really good idea. And it's been an interesting experience with me writing my book, because, you know, I often, you know, I'm going through this presentation, and as I was reviewing it and going through it all last night, you know, I'm the first one to say that I definitely have imposter syndrome and perfectionism and Superman, Superwoman syndrome all the time, you know, and I'll be, you know, often thinking, oh gosh, you know, am I doing enough? Am I helping enough? Am I smart enough to do this? Or have I got the skills to do this? And then I'll have people say to me, hey, Suze, you know, look at what you've achieved over the last 30 years. You know, you're reading your journey in your book is incredible. And I'll often look back and go, oh, yeah, it is pretty incredible what I've achieved. But I actually forget to sit down and actually acknowledge it and look at that. So if you're ever feeling down on yourself, or if you're ever feeling those feelings of not good enough, it's interesting to make a list of what you have done. And an interesting experience or exercise that I did with a leadership group once was we chomped our life down into decades and looked at what were the big milestone events that made us. So you could do it every 5 years or whatever. What were the milestone events that we overcame that made us through each of those decades? And it was really interesting to look at, you know, every single person in the group, there was about a dozen of us, had achieved amazing milestones, and they were all normal people that, like me, have constant or often have little creeping feelings of being, you know, not good enough. So if they do creep in, sit down, take stock and go, okay, well, look at what I have actually achieved this week. And that's why often when I start my coaching sessions, I start it with, okay, what have we achieved? And it's better to write it down if you can. So look at saying, what are all these things that I have achieved? Wow, they're pretty good. They've made an amazing difference to my clients, to my family, to my colleagues. You know, I have actually achieved quite a lot. So often we focus on the bad stuff that overwhelms us, but by rewarding our brains with the positive things that we're doing, we're giving our brain evidence to rewire itself, that we're actually counteracting those feelings of self-doubt by saying, hey, we have actually achieved a lot. So the point is, review regularly what achievements you have actually done, because you've got here to this point in life, which is pretty awesome, and no doubt you've overcome a lot of amazing achievements, and it's worth celebrating, and it's important to do it regularly. The last one here is to talk about it. And, you know, I think Brene Brown was one of the first people that started to talk about it. And I think she was the first one that I actually heard use the term imposter syndrome. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'd never heard anyone talk about that before. And I'm like, hey, that's me. I thought I was the only one that had these feelings of, you know, oh, will someone, you know, find out that, you know, I'm not as good as they think I am. So, you know, it's really important. And by her sharing those feelings in some of her talks, it made me think, wow, I'm not the only one. So share how you feel. If you've got these feelings, just by sitting and talking to somebody about how you feel, it can just release all those feelings and can let them go, and then by releasing them and accepting that other people have the same feelings, and talking about some you know, strategies and things that you're going to do to overcome them, it just makes it so much easier. Sometimes we need a bit of extra help from external sources. If you can't wrap your head around, you know, meditation or mantra, you know, it's just really good to sit down and have a chat. Loved ones are great people to sit down and talk with. Another thing that I haven't mentioned, and I'll stop sharing here for a second. Another thing that I haven't mentioned is, I think exercise for me is a really big one. It's a really big one for, you know, those negative patterns that sometimes people get in. I find if I don't exercise, even just a walk or yoga or even something gentle, it doesn't have to be hard cardiovascular, it just lifts those feelings, because by exercising we get natural endorphins, we help our brain, the neuron pathways are they're growing, and it just gives us this great boost of feeling of happiness. So and I know most of you on this webinar, I've spoken to you about it in the past, the difference of when you do exercise and when you don't. When you do exercise, those happy feelings come a lot easier. So I would very much encourage you, as you know, my last tip of how to overcome imposter syndrome is definitely exercise. Talk about your feelings. If you don't have someone close to talk about, go to a counsellor if it's getting really bad, because, you know, as I said in the beginning, often, even though it's not diagnosed as an actual syndrome, a psychological syndrome, it can be a precursor to depression. So if it's getting bad, see a counsellor, see a psychologist, join an online forum. There's no shame in having support. You know, if you had a broken leg, you go and get support. So I think that's really important to acknowledge that. So that's it for me. I hope that I've helped. Thank you very, very much. I've got some questions here. I've got Paul here who says, I guess in the current environment, it's now ever more important to support people. Yes, and that's why I wanted to do this. Communication, yes, he's mentioned that. Achievements, wins, definitely. They're very inexpensive. They're very cheap. Exercise is cheap. It costs nothing. Meditation, we can still go for a run. Meditation is free. You can do that anytime, any place. Sitting down and talking to a loved one is free. That all help. Sitting down and making a list of your achievements is free. And, you know, even you know, we do an exercise, and a few of you on the webinar have done it, where we give feedback of you know, our perception of the person. It's even fun to sit down with your loved one and, you know, and say, hey, you know, tell me the top 10 reasons why you love me. Yeah, imagine if you did that with your partner. How amazing would you feel afterwards? How that imposter syndrome would be just totally dissolved straight away. And even with your colleagues at work, sitting down and giving them feedback about what you think their strengths are and what you think they could actually improve on. It's a great exercise with, you know, looking at saying, you know, you are amazing at that. I think that's an amazing skill. Yes, you can work on this and I'll help you work on that. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and I really appreciate you all being on the call. If there is any other questions, I've got a couple of minutes here for other questions, and if I'm happy to answer them. I'm just trying to get my little Duvalaki up here so I can see the questions here. But I hope that it's helped, and I hope, here we go. Yep, I've got a couple of little comments here, and I think I've answered most of them. Here we go. Here's some questions here. Yes, I think if you live with somebody who has the imposter syndrome, great question. I just think it's really important to acknowledge it and support them, and you know, celebrate as much as you can with them on all the reasons. Give them evidence of why they are great and why they don't have, you know, they don't get them to not believe what's going on inside their head. And give them as much evidence as they can. I mean, I have had people with the imposter syndrome that have got 3 degrees and masters, and I've just thought they're a genius, and they think they're not good enough or not smart enough. So it happens to everybody. We just need to support them and help them get through it, whether it's our own self-talk or whether it's our partners or the people that we work with. So thank you for everyone being on the call, being on the webinar. I hope it's given people some ideas, and I hope it's helped. And go and tell yourselves how amazing you are. how grateful you are. Go for a walk and hug your loved ones and tell them how amazing they are, and you will feel on top of the world. Thanks a lot and have a great weekend. Thank you very much.